So imagine you are a tier 2 Valorant player and you've been at this for plenty of years. You've been able to improve as an individual and you've been able to improve to such an extent that you've been able to be a part of a very competitive team. And with that team, you've been able to improve in tier 2 to get to the point of Ascension where you've dominated your region and now you've qualified for that event. And you're in the journey of that and you're actually in the grand finals. But at the end of the day, fate does not smile upon you. You fall down in the grand finals at the very last possible obstacle before reaching the tier 1 land. I don't know if that's the right word, but you can understand my point that I'm trying to get at. And so that said, this kind of story, of course, is what happened to M80. M80 of North America, of course, as you are very familiar with, they opted to stay in tier 2 to try again for Ascension 2024. They did. They made it to the grand finals once again, needing one more series win to finally move up to VCT Americas. But again, as you guys already know, they fell to 2-game Esports 3-2 in the grand finals. And so as a result of that, they're in a position where they now have to figure out what it is they have to do next. And so that is the kind of thing we're going to be focusing on for today. I'm going to send you back to grand finals of Ascension 2024, in which M80, despite going ahead 2-1 in the series overall, they two-game on bind map 5, 13-6, a map that they haven't really played at all, and not being able to overcome the momentum that 2-game had in this map. And so they ended up losing to the Brazilian second seed to fall just short of reaching VCT Americas once again.
More! Yes, sir, why not? It's down to just BCJ. It's a team that had never seen a grand finals. It's a team that came into this tournament doubted and discounted. They will not be denied. 2-game Esports ascend to VCT Americas.
Cannot believe their eyes. A team that has been doubted, a team going into the interviews saying that they almost didn't even qualify into the Brazilian scene, going into challengers.
And so as you said, or as the caster said, a team that wasn't really expected to make a lot of noise in Ascension, ultimately came out on top and winning the event to reach tier 1, reach VCT Americas, and have the chance to play against the region's best teams and players for next year. And so job well done to them, but at the same time, it's a very tough way to describe the feeling that M80 went through at that moment, losing to the grand finals once again, in a heartbreaking fashion, because it's one thing to absorb a result like this in that very moment, but it's another thing to consider the kind of road M80 took to reach grand finals again of Ascension again, and again come up short. Because M80's story is a story that I've been following for quite a while, which spans around the sum of 2 years. And so M80, despite falling to the guard at the end of Ascension 2023 in the grand finals, they made the conscious decision to continue and just remain in the fight for reaching VCT Americas for 2024. And sure, they allowed their players to step aside and look for their options for the 2024 season. And sure, they saw the exit of players like EU and John Cutie to tier 1 teams, them being 100 Thieves and Sentinels. But after the dust was settled and the remaining people were left without a team, Koala Noob, Nismo, and Xander, they came together and said, okay, fuck it, let's go for another try. And let's try again for 2024. Let's bring in 2 new people and we'll see how this goes. And it's a very valiant work from them, considering the state that Tier 2 was in, because Tier 2 in NA, we saw a lot of Oryx drop out of the the scene immediately after Ascension, also because there's a large gap. There was a large gap between the end of the season to the start of 2024, which was around 6 months. And if you have people being paid by an org to just literally do nothing for that same time frame, then what's the point of just having them still be under the payroll? You just basically be losing money. And so that led to a lot of unsigned people, a lot of independent teams trying to build recognition for themselves and continue their careers. And so amidst all of that, M80 continued, and they brought new people. They brought Nitro, which was back then a part of CS Team Liquid, a legendary player, and he was a part. He was a part of 100 Thieves in 2020, 2021, winning first strike, of course, and also winning, or more so finishing in semifinals of Masters Berlin. And you also had the likes of BCJ, part of EG in 2023, stepped into the bench for Demon One, of which that latter player would play a huge part into the Orcs winning of champions of that year. And you got a new team in M80, and so the team kind of had to go through a few bumps along the way. Parting ways with Nitro, bringing in Net, who was a part of the guard squad that won Ascension last year. But they were able to make it work, and they were able to return to this position of winning, or of being in the hunt of winning Ascension. And unfortunately, they weren't able to do that. We're not able to do that. And so, with that said, with 2 years of working so hard to win Ascension and getting the promotion to Americas and having nothing to show for it, and just having two silver medals instead, then the question of what comes next really comes into clear view for M80 and its players. Because for M80, the org, I understand that they had to pay a lot of money to not only sustain the team, but also continue with the team and continue playing in a game like Valorant, where the only feasible way to be a team or be an org and just be in a rather kind of comfortable position is to be in tier 1 and be able to receive the benefits of being a part of like VCT America, such as like receiving money to pay for the cost of the salaries, and being able to pay for the other logistics and sustaining a team in Los Angeles. And so to not be able to do that, it's a very devastating thing for M80 to absorb once again for another year. And so by that sense, when it comes to allowing the players and the coaches to take their separate ways and find their options, it's a very understandable way. And so shortly after the end of Ascension, the M80 players and team players and coaches went to social media and just basically gave their LFT posts, just to say, hey, I'm open, I'm looking for a team, I want to find any offers that are available to us. Nismo, he even mentioned about how he had to sacrifice a lot for the continuation of his career this year, because he has a family and he had to not focus much attention on them and just focus on the team and build that synergy and be at a position where they can win. Sadly, they weren't able to do that. And so despite all of that, Nismo still continuing, still looking to look for another team. And so, yeah. And then you got other people like Happy and Gunter and BCJ say the same. And I think no other player best kind of describes what the situation is like for M80 and the other losing teams from Ascension than the words right here. The feeling of not knowing what comes next for my career is eating me alive. And there's no doubt in understanding the mentality that BCJ had at that time he wrote this, because as one of the coaches kind of on social media, a few numbers, a few players, a few teams within tier two was already like kind of in discussion of joining, or more so individuals, not entire teams, but people, players were in conversations with tier one teams of potentially joining them for next year, or maybe even early on in the off, once the free agent market officially opens. This is a story that is very familiar within the Valorant, roster mania story. Of course, you got the teams that weren't able to, or you got the players from tier two teams that weren't able to win Ascension, but still stand out in a way that generated a lot of buzz from their form. And so as a result, you have these conversations, and that would eventually result in agreements being made with the tier two teams. When the people that kind of come into my mind is Oxy, EU, John Cutie, people like that, people that would join the likes of Sentinels, Cloud9, and 100 Thieves from end of 2023 to 2024, and you kind of remember how they turned out, each of them standing out in their own way. And so you have that happen, and you put that into a calendar like this in 2024, where you got Ascension finishing roughly a month after Champions. And so by the time the roster mania begins for tier one, and all of the attention is put towards that, you got tier two teams still in the midst of winning Ascension, focusing on Ascension. And so that doesn't give them any time to just focus on, pursuing offers that are presented to them by tier one teams. Only the teams and players that ultimately ended up not even making Ascension, they get the first dibs on that. One of the people that come into my mind on that also is, Oxygen Esports. You got Verno joining NRG, Bonkar joining NRG as a player and coach respectively. As reported by Anonymotum, Alejandro Gomes of Sheep Esports, they were the ones that fell just short. They fell to the likes of TSM and M80 in NA Challengers playoffs, and so they saw their season finish early. And so as a result of that, they had a lot of time to look at offers and say yes and accept. And so you compare that to the likes of M80, they weren't in any position to even be into contact with the tier one teams, because think about it. If you got players from M80 come into contact with tier one teams, and you have that going on while they're also preparing for Ascension, it's going to be a very, I would say, tough, or more so chaotic position or environment that will be created, because not only will the players that are in those conversations would be focusing on that, then they won't be able to focus on competing and winning Ascension, because if that happens, and that will infringe on the team's chances, it will infringe on the org's chances of receiving the benefits of being a partner team for 2025, and it'll also infringe on the players' own chances of reaching VCT Americas, because if, let's say, hypothetical, if they're in conversations, they're still doing that eventually goes south, and they were doing that during their run in Ascension, and then Ascension doesn't work out, and then they lose, then what's the fucking point? You just don't do that. It's an understanding from the players in that will be put into that situation where they have to focus on finishing the season with their team, and if they just bail out at the last second, then what the fuck, then yeah. And so, even so, once Ascension is all said and done, then by the time the teams that participated are now free to do whatever they want, then they are then heading into a market where everything's basically done. And sure, you have a few teams that will kind of prolong their process of finalizing their roster. You have like teams like NRG or Leviathan that signed the likes of like Ethan, Demon One, and Calm at like literally a few weeks before the start of kickoff. But in a lot of ways, you have basically the entirety of like tier one already finalized, and so with that in mind, it puts the people in M80 and like other teams at a very unfavorable position. That said, when the M80 players have to consider the little offers they have at their disposal, and they have to potentially return to tier two, and they're getting back into a tier two where sure there's split three coming up in a few months, but there's logistically nothing to play for because I mean, aside from just being in tier two and just having to fight for the right to stay in tier two, then what incentive is there? Because Ascension is done. You had your chance to reach tier one. That didn't happen, and so now you're gonna be in a position where there's you're gonna have to look for orgs that the little orgs that still would want to be in Valorant during this time of the year, while knowing full well that paying for players at this time of the year would basically be no real benefit. And it's the reason why orgs like Oxygen, TSM, and potentially M80 are going to drop out for this off season, or maybe who knows, not even return, because as I said, no opportunities to build something of a semblance of like promise for next year when you know full well that there's really nothing to play for. So what does this mean for tier 2 North America Valorant? Then I will say it's going to be in a pretty difficult position in where it is right now, in the sense of just you got nothing to play for. You basically going to have little to no orgs covering, or more so being in the scene, and the only time in which orgs are now going to be able to look at a Valorant and say, okay, now's the right time to get into this is 2025, or more so like in the stage where we're very close to Ascension. Because at the end of the day, getting into tier one is the main focus of orgs that are looking to be in this game. That's kind of my feelings of it anyways, because we saw plenty of orgs just kind of drop out, not only just focusing on this year, but more so after the announcement of the teams that would make the partnership leagues for 2023. It was very evident from the jump that Riot would eventually adopt this current format, going from open circuit from 2020 to 2022, and then going to partnership, and then having teams just kind of be in franchising, and just kind of in a way being similar to how it was at the start of League of Legends and Riot, going from open circuit to just being split by split basis, with teams ultimately going into franchising and just being the same, and there being no promotion or relegation. And orgs understanding this for Valorant basically pour all their resources into trying to get in to that field. And so when it became evident for those that weren't able to get into the leagues, that they weren't going to be there, then it became a no-brainer for them to just walk out. Is M80 allowing their players to look for different opportunities for themselves, signifying the end of M80 in Valorant? It's really tough to say, but looking at all of the other orgs that kind of stepped away from Valorant throughout this current format, it's not hard to see that as a possibility. We saw the likes of TSM step out. We saw the likes of FaZe step out. We saw the likes of the Guard step out. We saw DSG move to a different region. We saw Mad Lions, teams that were in NA Challengers 2023. All of them step out of Valorant. Then you see a correlation of just how not favorable the game is in terms of sustainability. And yeah. And I'm gonna leave you guys with one more thing to say as to the effects of like M80, them being in tier two, uh, being in Ascension, losing in Ascension, all that stuff. I'm gonna leave you with this graphic or message that Ascend left in regards to their announcement of leaving Valorant for the foreseeable future. And of course, Ascend. This is the team that won the very first Valorant Champions event in 2021, defeating Gambit, despite being the first legendary team to win the first major event in Valorant history. They saw it best to leave the game, and as a result of their leaving the game, they cited the increasingly hostile ecosystem has simply made it untenable to responsibly run a team. This is a team that has been paying their players, paying their content creators, doing their due diligence in sustaining a team over the past 4 years. Going from tier one, getting dumped down to tier two, fighting hard in tier two, trying to get to Ascension, ultimately coming short on that, but still continuing from 2023 to 2024, still doing that. And despite all of that, despite all doing all of the good things that is expected for an org to do in a game like Valorant, they saw that it was much better to just step aside and take a different route. And so when you have a team like Ascend that gave massive contributions to the Valorant scene, and you see them step out and say it's not really good to be in tier two, then what does that say about the state of tier two globally? What does that say about tier two in APAC? What does that say about tier two in EMEA? What does that say in China? What does that say in North America? What does that say about M80 looking at this and saying, you know what, Ascend has a point, and it might be best for us to kind of step aside. I'm not putting words into M80's mouths as to what they should do, but if they do step out of Valorant, I don't blame them. So that said, Pedro Romero, Ascend, M80, Tier 2, see ya.